Hey everyone, Emily and I are here. We just played Intarsia. This is a new one from Pegasus Spiel and designer Michael Kiesling. If you're familiar with that name, he's done a lot of games.
A lot of games.
Heaven and Ale, to call. I mean, he's done a lot of games.
But also
Azul. A lot of all the Azul games. And this game is probably going to be, at least at face value, compared most to Azul.
I'll say when we were at Gen Con, we saw this game getting demoed, and I was like, ooh, Kiesling, the pieces, it looks like Azul. And I was like, I have to try it because I want to see if it's like that or what this new iteration is.
And visually, it is. Gameplay, it plays very, very differently. However, I would say it's also going to push a lot of the same buttons that someone enjoys Azul might enjoy. But we want to tell you a little bit about the game and our experience playing it, and also kind of ask the question: Is it different enough from Azul? Would we recommend this instead of Azul?
Is it better than Azul?
Or is it better than Azul? And I would also say, is it enough for where we are in gaming in 2024?
Yes.
Because I think if this came out when Azul came out, and then let's imagine Azul never existed, maybe this hits nearly as well as Azul. I'm not sure if it would hit as nearly as well, but maybe. But today, in the landscape that we see today, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, but so in this game, instead of glass making or tile laying, we're actually putting down pieces of wooden flooring.
Yes.
Intarsia.
Intarsia. It's not just flooring, but also artwork. This is the act of using different pieces of wood sort of interlaid with each other to kind of create like a parquet floor. In this game, you're going to be making these patterns on your floorboard by spending resources. At the beginning of each round, you're going to get a card that has all the resources, which are depicted by these other cards of various colors. And then turn to turn, you're literally just trying to string out as much from those turns to spend those resources to acquire these pieces and add them to your floor.
So I think the way that it feels similar is that you have these resources that you are trying to efficiently use to make this mosaic of some kind, right? So in that way, and they're also gorgeous pieces, right? So like as you're doing it, you're thinking like, okay, I want to string along my turns to do this. And if you do a bigger piece or like a more valuable piece, you also get more resources back. So you can kind of combo it so that your turns get a little bit longer and longer.
Which feels a little summer pavilion-y.
Yes, for sure. Like when you surround something and then you get an extra thing.
Get something.
That's what this kind of feels like, where you're like, okay, I'm going to do this. It costs 3, but now I get 2 back, and now I can use those 2 on my next turn. And that's what you're trying to do. You're like puzzling it out together.
Yeah, it is a really big part of the game, but it's sort of one of 2 different approaches you can take, because instead of stringing your turn out, which I don't advise, you can actually just spend less resources to get individual pieces, like the frames, which is sort of the first part of each section that you're wanting to get, or the connectors, which cost quite a bit more, but they're easier to sort of like just add to your floor. Those connectors cost 4 of any one color resource, but it's those connectors, in addition to sort of finishing out one of these all the way with 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 pieces total, that lets you use this sort of reward dial and get extra resources during your turn. Otherwise, you're just going to spend your resources and then have to pass and not really get as much done. I figured this out after Emily figured it out. In round 2, she was really laying connectors all over the place. The thing is, those connectors are going to give you some ongoing points.
It's kind of like in Queen's Garden, in Azul Queen's Garden, when you put out those new pieces, it also gives you points each round. So I love doing that because I'm like, now I have more possibilities. Plus, it's giving me points each round.
Every round.
Well, every round, these connectors are both giving you more options to choose from and more points as you go on. So you're kind of like, well, yeah, I want to kind of get more connectors.
100%, and that's what I might try in my next game. The alternative to that, and maybe not alternative, but something you're balancing. It's basically these 2 approaches. It's that sort of laying the groundwork, getting some of those easy ongoing points, or there's this big board out here with very specific objectives to make, the first tile that's purple on the outside and has the next piece or the next 2 pieces inside of it. You might be able to grab one of these tiles and score the points accordingly. These tiles are in these various different sort of categories, and the more of the same sort of category tile you get, the more you'll score. You get to rescore that same category tile that you already have. So for instance, if I scored this, I'm not only getting the 2 points, but also rescoring this 2 and rescoring this 2. So that's the other way to kind of continually score throughout the game. But if you're doing that it's a bit at odds with laying
It is.
that groundwork with the connectors.
Because really, this is kind of like a race and a puzzle in itself, in that like each column is going to have one of each different color of frames. So then it's saying like, you might be going for this now, but actually if you want to get more points from this type of tool, you're going to have to switch to a different color, switch to a different thing, and keep going back and forth. I kind of did more of like a, let's get the easiest ones from everything and just get a smattering of points. And David did a really good job of like, I'm going to go for the high value stuff that's going to combo well together. And plus, it's still racing. So like, if I saw that he was going for something, I could kind of switch my strategy and be like, actually, I'm going to try to take that before he does so that he can't get the points. That was a new thing I felt like in this, was like the racing against each other.
Yeah, and I think that racing, just to make another point on that, is one of the areas where that is kind of the only part of this game that has player interaction. And I would say, while we haven't played it at more than 2 players, I do think it would be a better game in that respect with more players.
Sure.
Now, it's going to be a little bit more chaotic because these things are just going to be totally up for grabs.
Yeah.
And there's going to be more people inevitably going after them. In a 2-player game, I think we both probably looked at each other and saw what we were doing. And there's only a couple of times where we chose. I mean, we could have been more aggressive, I suppose. But there's a couple times where we basically chose, well, she's going to get that. I'm not even going to look at that. I'm going after this and this. There were a couple times where I think you thought I could have snuck in and took it.
And I was like,
didn't.
please don't. But then he did, and I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna let him do his thing. I'll do my thing. Hopefully, it's more points in the end.
But like Emily alluded to earlier, it's that stringing along of your turn that I think is where the most fun happens in this game. Without that, it's a very basic game where you're just collecting a certain set of resources through these resource cards at the beginning of every round, and then spending those to do a thing. That's okay.
Yeah.
It's a very straightforward sort of basic game and a basic experience. This reward wheel is really where it opens up, because you can get those rewards, like I said, by doing the connectors or ultimately building the table in the center of a piece. And that lets you move around, get more resources, and then you could build another connector maybe, or finish that table.
Yeah.
Get more resources, continue doing that, and that really makes it feel, those rounds feel a lot more rewarding. If you're not doing that, I really would almost say you're not playing the game right.
Right. It's about planning and planning ahead, right? So you're not just trying to do from turn to turn tactically, like, I'm going to do this. Now I'm going to do this. You're trying to think like, okay, I'm going to do this so that I can then do the next thing, so that I can then do the next thing. And that's when you feel like you're really starting to get your gears going in this game.
Right. So like we said at the beginning of this, is this enough? Is it better than Azul? Is this a game that you'd recommend today to someone? Or would you say, if you don't have Azul, maybe try Azul?
I would say this is not better than Azul. I would say what I really like about Azul is that it's so elegant. I think this on its own is pretty elegant. Like, it's not super complicated. You're just taking cards to lay down things. But the thing that it's missing that I really like from Azul is the player interaction with the drafting.
The drafting, yeah.
And because it doesn't have that, it has a little bit of this racing, but it's really not the same kind of feeling. It feels much more like you get your resources at the beginning of the round, and then you're all just kind of doing your own thing. So it feels much more like multiplayer solitaire than Azul does, where Azul has that whole first part where it feels like very, very competitive, right? Where you're like, I'm going to take these so that you can't get those. I'm going to take those so that you can't get those. And it feels much more like involved with the people in the table. I feel like this was definitely lacking from that.
Yeah, I would also add to that, given the idea of the drafting versus this interaction is going to be that kind of interaction that maybe leads to some newer players feeling a little bit frustrated, more so than in Azul.
Yeah.
We've all played Azul. Someone's taken the tiles you wanted, but you very quickly get over that, and you often just look at another tile and go, oh, I'll take these, and you can make things happen. It's very kind of in the moment. This game, you're going to feel frustrated when you're not necessarily paying attention to what other players are doing, and you're building a couple things towards one of these more significant tiles, and then all of a sudden, before it gets back to you, someone does it just before you were about to. And of course, like I said, you weren't paying attention, and maybe you should have, but that is going to be one of those moments where a new player goes like, oh, and it's hard. It's harder to rebound from that, in my opinion.
Well, especially
than it is
in this,
in
because
Azul.
like when you take one of these, you keep scoring those points every time you get something from that same column. So it's going to keep being in your face. Like, remember when you didn't get those 3 points? Well, I did, and now I'm going to keep scoring them over and over again.
Well, not only that, but I might have been going after this, and it might have triggered 3 other pieces that I already had. And if you took
exactly.
it, it's not just these 3 points that you're taking from me.
Right.
It's a lot more than that. And our scores were, I think you had 106
Yes.
and I had 96. So we are scoring pretty
Quite a
high
bit,
points by the end of the game. But again, taking one of those tiles, that could be what, 10 to 12 points maybe in one go. So yeah, it's really interesting in that respect. The other question that we posed at the beginning of the video is this enough in 2024, let's say? And I would say the big difference between now and then is the landscape of games. There's a lot more games out there.
There are.
I mean, speaking specifically of Azul, what are there, 4 or 5
There's 4
different?
of them right
there's
now.
a lot of Azul games out there. So there's a lot more competition out there. I do think back then, had this come out, this would have landed similar, probably not quite like Azul did.
But I think it would have done really, really well.
I
at
do
the
think
time.
it would do really well.
Because it's gorgeous, it's fun what you're doing. It has that elegance, right? That Kiesling's good at, about saying like all you have to do is X, Y, Z, and then you kind of have this little puzzle that you get to do for yourself. It's just in comparison to other games we see nowadays, and there's so many games in the market.
There are.
I think that's where it's going to struggle.
I do. We didn't mention this. The tactile enjoyment of putting this together
it's beautiful.
That kills Azul, quite
Yes,
frankly, because
yeah.
there isn't really, other than the feel of the tiles in
Yeah.
Azul, which is also quite nice. Putting these pieces together and finally completing one with a table, it's like you're building a puzzle.
It's
like
so-
more
it's just,
so
like,
than most
so
Yeah, it's
satisfying.
very, very satisfying. So to answer that question, is it enough? I think it will be for a lot of players. If you're newer to the hobby, and we have to remember, there are
There's
people
still
new to the hobby
yes.
every day. And those new people, if they've never played Azul, and Emily's not around to say, hey, try Azul instead, this is an absolutely great game for those types of people. I don't think it's going to give what people like us want from a game these
Exactly.
days because of how many games we've played. It's nothing against the game. It's really more a comment on the landscape of gaming out there.
Yes.
This is a pretty straightforward game. I think new players, I know my family members who play far fewer games than me, when I see them once a year or whatever, might play this and go, oh, that's good. They didn't have to think too much.
No, yes.
You can play and feel somewhat successful, even if you're not doing as well as other players.
Right.
It's satisfying in its own
It's
right.
not overly complicated, right?
It's not overly complicated.
But there are decisions you're making.
And I think there's enough, just enough for a new player to kind of play once and realize, oh, I should have done more of
I
that.
could do even better
so
if
that
I
I
did
can
that.
string it out,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
you can see a better player doing a little bit better than you, and maybe gives you that desire to want to play again. But that's what we feel. Those are our feelings. Those are, hopefully we answered those questions anyway. Let us know what you think, though, in the comments below. Based on what you know about the game, based on what we said, do you think this is enough for you? Do you think you like this more, enough, or less than Azul?
Are you going to get it if you already own Azul?
Yeah, I will say, it's tactilely speaking, not tactically, tactilely speaking.
Tactile,
Yeah.
yes.
It is very, very satisfying. But yeah, let us know in the comments below what you think. We'll get down there and answer whatever you want to ask us. Until next time, though, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.